Alright, so let's discuss about O of n. Here we have a slightly more complex example. Here we are iterating over all the items in this array and printing each items in the console. This is where the size of the input matters. If you have a single item in this array, we're going to have one print operation. But if you have 1 million items, obviously we're going to have 1 million print operations. So the cost of this algorithm grows linearly and in direct correlation with the size of the input. We represent the runtime complexity of this method using the big O of n, where n represents the size of the input. So as n grows, the cost of this algorithm also grows linearly. And it doesn't matter what kind of loop you're going to use over this array. Here we are using a traditional for loop. Now, what if we have a print statement before and after the for loop? What do you think is the runtime complexity of this method? Well, we saw that these single operations run in constant time. So here we have big O of 1, our loop runs in big O of n, and once again we have a big O of 1. So the runtime complexity of this method is O of 1 plus n plus 1, which we can simplify to O of 2 plus n. However, when we use the big O notation, we drop the constants because they don't really matter, and here is the reason. If our array has 1 million input and adding to it 2 extra operations doesn't have a significant impact on the cost of our algorithm. The cost of our algorithm still increases linearly, so we can simplify this by dropping this constant. And what matters is the cost of this algorithm increases linearly and in direct proportion with the size of the input. If we have 5 items in the input, we're going to have 5 operations. If we have 1 million items, we're going to have 1 million operations. Now, what if you have 2 loops here? What do you think the runtime complexity of the algorithm is? It's going to be big O of n plus n or big O of 2n. There's another example where we drop the constant, because here it's an approximation of the cost of this algorithm relative to the input size. So n or 2n still represents a linear growth. Now, what if this method has 2 parameters, an array of numbers and an array of characters? So first we iterate over the array of number and then we iterate over the array of characters. What do you think is the time complexity here? Well, both these loops runs in O of n, and here is the tricky part. What is n in this case? Here we are not dealing with one input, we're dealing with 2 inputs, numbers and characters. So what if we distinguish between these 2 inputs? We could use n for the size of numbers and m for the size of characters. So the runtime complexity of this method is gonna be O of n plus m. And also we can simplify this to O of n because the runtime of this method increases linearly. And here is the curve representing O of n.